number 6, interview with Dr. Bertram Schaffner, May 5th, 1998. Do you consider yourself close to your Jewish roots?
Let me stop and think. I think I'm very close to my Jewish roots emotionally. I'm not sure how close I am to my Jewish roots intellectually. I think I mentioned to you that when I went to Israel, that I was taken by surprise to see what a strong emotion I felt when the plane landed, which I hadn't expected. So that tells me clearly that I have a definite, real Jewish identification, and that when I belonged to the Quaker Society, I really only joined because my mother wanted me not to have to go to war. That was her idea. It was not mine. And I never felt that at home among the Quakers. And I never tried to go back. I think, unfortunately, I got, use the word tainted, by some of the Jewish prohibitions having to do with sexuality. I know that I don't want to make absolute statements. I'm really talking about tendencies. There's a certain tendency in Jewish traditions, and I'm speaking not only of German Jewish, but I've worked for a while with Mark Swarovski and Betsy White on a book called Life is with People about the shtetl, and so I feel very familiar with those values too. But I think somehow there's a disapproval of masturbation that pervades much of Jewish child training, and a kind of disapproval of sexuality. Procreation is fine, but I think even the mikveh implies a kind of something wrong with the female genitalia. Now, how much of that is due to my mother's teaching? How much of it is connected with what I've heard when I've been interviewing my Jewish patients? But somehow I was left with a strong feeling that being sexual is something to feel guilty about, something wrong, something you don't talk about. I don't know how much I'm exaggerating this, but at any rate, in my own life, I associated Jewishness with a disapproval and repression of sexuality. And I think that's interfered very much with my feeling happily Jewish. Um, I feel loyal to Jews. I feel a duty toward Jews. I would never renounce Judaism. But somehow to me, Judaism feels disapproving of me at my center. And when I see Eastern European Jews celebrating at a wedding, I was shocked and delighted the first time I went to an Eastern European wedding at the freedom, at the joy, at the mothers dancing, their duty is accomplished. That part I like. But somehow you don't see that in the kind of Judaism that I was raised in. I don't think I ever enjoyed the Talmudic kind of life or dialogue. Maybe I was too serious for it, or maybe I felt restricted. I think I'm very much against black and white morality, all or nothing. I, wrongly or rightly, I associate Judaism with all or nothing morality and dogmatism. I think if you're brought up in the German Jewish kind of morality, it's a morality that says if you don't obey our laws, you're out, and you can be excommunicated. I find that true of Judeo-Protestant thinking. I think that's one of the things I like about Indian religion, is that it's more accepting, and that they're not so surprised if you're different. India, at its best, lives together with a lot of different religions. They have just one requirement, that is, you must believe in something. It doesn't matter which religion, as long as you do have a system of belief and values, and that you're responsible for leading your own life. My mother used to say, Judaism is very ethical. I'm not sure that I was able to find the ethics in the way Judaism treated me. And you know, the Jewish establishment has been the slowest of all religions to accept homosexuality. So that affects my feeling.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to interview you today and to hear your story.
I wish I could have a moment to just say thank you to you. I think you're doing an incredible job. As I understand it, your main purpose is to make sure that the world doesn't forget and doesn't do this again. And I heartily support that. I just hope that this conversation today has been or will be useful. I'd hate to think it was just for gratifying me. I mean, I've had a wonderful time being able to talk with you, but I hope it will do something for someone else.
My name is Nancy Fisher. Today's date is May 5th, 1998. I'm here to interview the American psychiatrist and rescuer, Dr. Bertram Schaffner, in his home in New York City, New York, USA. The language of this interview is English. My name is Nancy Fisher. Today's date is May 5th, 1998. I'm here to interview the American psychiatrist and rescuer, Dr. Bertram Schaffner, in his home in New York City, New York, USA. The language of this interview is English. Please tell me your name and spell it for me.
I'm Bertram Schaffner, B-E-R-T-R-A-M, Schaffner, S-C-H-A-F-F-N-E-R.
Was that your name at birth?
I had a middle name, Henry.
Where were you born?
In Erie, Pennsylvania.
And what is your date of birth?
November 12th, 1912. I'm 85 now.
What was your father's name?
My father's name was Milton Schaffner.
And your mother's name?
Her name was Goethe, actually born as Goethe, and then they changed it to Margareta, because the days of being very poetic with names. Her last name was Herzog, H-E-R-Z-O-G.
Did you have any siblings?
One brother, 6 years younger, Morris Ralph Schaffner.
Do you know your grandparents' names on your father and mother's side?
Oh, yes. My grandfather was Morris Schaffner, and his wife's name was Carolina Schuster, S-C-H-U-S-T-E-R. On my mother's side, her father was Solomon Herzog, H-E-R-Z-O-G, and her mother was Bertha, B-E-R-T-H-A, Rosenbaum, R-O-S-E-N-B-A-U-M.
Where was your mother born?
My mother was born in Germany, in the same village where both my grandfathers were born.
And your father?
My father was born here.
Do you know how they met?
Yes. My German grandfather wanted his daughter to visit America and hopefully to marry an American. So he sent her here when she was 15 to visit his brothers in Youngstown, Ohio. And she came again at 18. And on the first visit, she missed my father. On the second visit, she met him for just a few days when she was 18. And somehow the shidduch was arranged that they were to get married. And so they planned to marry in 1910, but my mother's mother died of a brain tumor, and they put off the wedding till 1911, and my father went to Europe, and they were married in Darmstadt, Germany.
Did you grow up in Erie?
Yes. I was born there and stayed till I was 15 when I graduated from high school and went to Harvard.
Would you please be specific in describing the nature of the encounter that you had in Berlin? What was its purpose?
Well, I am homosexual, and I was hoping to meet somebody to have sex with. There's also a memory I can't get quite clearly, but Berlin, of course, had been one of the homosexual centers of the world, and somebody had given me the address of a club in Berlin where I was told that homosexuals still met. And I think prior to meeting this young man on the street, I think I had gone to that club, and I was appalled. It was full of people like the Nazis on the train. Some even had some Nazi uniforms, but they really were people I wouldn't have been comfortable with in any way, shape, or form. And also, I think I had the feeling it's not safe to talk to anybody. So I really only stayed there about 10 minutes and left. And I think it was after that that then I thought, well, in other years when I'd been in Germany, I'd met people casually. And so I was hoping to do that in Berlin. In our little hotel was in a kind of residential area, and it seemed like should be a safe place to talk to people. But evidently the young man didn't think it was a safe place. After all, it was dictatorship, and I had never lived in a dictatorship before. And this is the way I kind of caught on to what it's like being in a dictatorship, that you're no longer really free, and that it's dangerous.
Was the club that you went to located in any particular part of Berlin?
Yes, and I don't think I can remember I would say, like, not Unter den Linden, but Charlottenburg, which is now still a kind of area of nocturnal entertainment.
Did you understand what the prevailing attitude in Germany was towards homosexuality?
Not fully until then, because I knew that there had been what was it called, the beer hall putsch, engineered by Röhm, who was homosexual and who was arrested and executed along with his friends. But I didn't know that there evidently was then getting to be an organized persecution of homosexuals, because I don't think it happened all at once. I think there was that putsch, and then I think homosexuals were let alone for a while. But then I think as Hitler got more and more afraid of international espionage, I think they felt the homosexuals were dangerous, but I think they also felt they should be gotten rid of because of this slogan about purifying German blood or German inheritance.
Did you subsequently learn how homosexual men were treated in Germany and what happened to them?
I learned about it, but I learned about it after the war. I didn't know about the pink triangle until here, long after I was back. It's hard to describe. See, I was in the Army from, in active duty from April 41 until July 46. I was not reading the ordinary newspaper. The newspaper I got was what was published in the Army, and I'd get to see the newspaper maybe every 3, 4, or 5 weeks, and it didn't have that kind of news in it.
What was the pink triangle?
The pink triangle was the piece of cloth sewed over, I think, the left breast, the way the yellow Star of David was sewed onto the clothing of every Jew. Now, when I'd been in Germany in 1936, there were no yellow stars. I don't know when they started.
Who wore the pink triangle?
The gay men.
Do you know where they wore, how they were identified that way, and where they had to wear that triangle?
I don't know. I'd be glad if you'd tell me, if you know.
Well, many were arrested and put in concentration camps and so identified. Were you ever drafted?
Yes, I was drafted in October 1940 and taken into active service in April 41.
Would you describe that period of service?
Well, first, I was sent to Governor's Island and put into the selective service system to examine psychiatrically all the draftees and to decide whether they were mentally fit for service or whether they would break down, and specifically not to accept any gay people into the Army. And in some ways, that was hardly like being at war, because we were billeted in what was in the Hotel Shelton at 49th and Lexington. And every morning I would take the subway and then the ferry across to Governor's Island. And hundreds of these men would come through, and we'd have 2 or 3 minutes to examine them. But I had to develop a special technique to be able to ask people about their sex lives and not ask very many questions. And interestingly enough, I found it a little bit boring doing this 6-7 hours a day and asking the same kind of questions all the time. So a doctor at Hopkins suggested that I could do some research. I didn't realize then that this was not research other people had done. In fact, this was before Kinsey. And I'm the only psychiatrist mentioned in the Kinsey report having gotten these statistics.
We're going to take a break and resume in a minute. This is tape number 4, May 5th, 1998, interview with Dr. Bertram Schaffner. Was there a clearly stated policy in the U.S. Army about gay men?
Oh, there were extremely clear policies. Gay men were not to be accepted, and if they were in the Army, they were to be discharged dishonorably and not to get any of the benefits of having served military service. And for me, that was quite a challenge because I thought as a doctor, my obligation was not only to take care of the Army, but as a doctor, I also felt I had a duty to the people going through. Because after all, if I were to learn certain secrets, which I was forced to get, and which they were forced in a way to tell, I didn't think it was fair for them to be scarred for life and to be in disgrace and to have the community know things about them that they didn't need to know. So I very early on, whenever I would get an idea or I would get a hint from the selectee that he might be gay, I would try to ask him how he really felt about how he'd get along in the Army. Because there were those who knew very strongly that they couldn't stand it, that they would certainly break down, be a burden to the Army. They wouldn't be able to go through combat and could be scarred for life. And I would discharge them, but I would always try to find another diagnosis so that they could be medically honorably discharged. I had a feeling that was what we owed them, is not to expose them at a time, after all, 40 years ago, when there was nothing in the laws or in the public climate of opinion to protect them. On the other hand, there were people who would say that they were gay, but they wanted to serve. And I would certainly say that, I'm one of those. I could have claimed or wanted to be a conscientious objector on the basis of, at that time I belonged to a Quaker society. But I decided when Hitler was doing this to the Jews that I really should be a soldier and really should fight. I don't think I quite knew how hard it was going to be for me, but at any rate, I decided, and there were a lot of other people who were gay but felt they either should be in the Army or they could be. So I felt it was important to let them in, and again, put nothing in their record that could hurt them. So I knew that I was not obeying Army regulations, but after all, in wartime, you have to do a lot of things that you might otherwise think are illegal. All's fair in love and war.
Did you ever see active military duty, battle?
Oh, yes.
Were you ever sent overseas?
Yes. In August 44, which was a month after D-Day, we were sent to Normandy. And we were in Patton's army. And we were living in those villages where the trucks, the supply trucks went through, which were called the Red Ball Express. and they would roar through these little villages at night. And so I was living in tents, and I was in an armored battalion, and I was in what they called the psychiatric triage, where as people broke down mentally, they would be sent through me if they were not physically injured, and I would have to decide whether to treat them and keep them in the army or treat them and let them go home to bigger hospitals. And one of the first nights in France, I woke up one night, I was put in charge of a tent with about 30 mentally ill soldiers, and woke up the next morning and found that the armored division had moved on and left us. I didn't know when we would be picked up. And I went outside the tent and found all these German bodies lying on the ground, dead. And I was just afraid to move because I didn't know whether the area was mined or whether there might still be some German soldiers. And none of our protecting group were there. Then next place I remember our stopping was in Metz, and we moved into a, I think, big empty factory that Germans had just moved out of. They'd been defeated and captured, and every place they moved out of was full. They had all defecated there. So it was terrible to have to move into these buildings and clean them up and then sleep there. And this is my picture of myself, Bertram Schaffner, when I graduated from Swarthmore College in 1932. This was a picture taken of me in my very first year in military service in 1942 at the outside the Armory in Albany, New York. This is a book that I published in 1948. It's a study of German authoritarianism based upon my work with the Information Control Division of American military government in Germany in 1945 and 6. The foreword was written by Margaret Mead, introduction by Dr. David M. Levy, a child psychiatrist and a member of OSS during the war days.